We met at work completely by accident. She was the owner's eldest daughter, but still his favorite little princess. At 22, having graduated from university with some meaningless degree, she stood 5 feet 6 inches tall. Janet was every man's dream with a stunning body and a smile that could melt an iceberg. She had long, flowing blonde hair and the most beautiful blue eyes anyone had ever seen. I was already in the elevator, returning from lunch, when she came running across the lobby to catch him. I guessed that she was in a hurry to meet her father. As she entered the elevator, she tripped on her high heels and tripped, falling on top of me in the process. We both ended up on the floor. I got to my feet fairly quickly and helped her up, then reached out to scoop up the contents of her spilled Mary Poppins-sized purse. I was amazed at how much she could fit in it, not to mention that she had the strength to carry it. To be honest, I had seen her before and was one of the besotted men who idolized her the whole time, knowing that she didn't even notice us when she walked by. I knew which floor she wanted and pressed the button, and when the elevator went up, I continued to help her. I was handing her the rest of the contents of her bag when the elevator doors opened, and as I did so, I looked into her beautiful eyes and smiled. She tilted her head, looked at my badge, and whispered, "James Thomas." It was me. Such a cute name. I like it. She turned and walked out of the elevator, leaving me standing there, still smiling. Stepping out of the elevator, she turned and looked at me as the doors closed. I was amazed. I was still smiling when the elevator returned to my floor, and I returned to my desk, not quite ready to unravel the mysteries of the accounting software package our company was interested in purchasing. The next day was payday, and I was getting ready to go out to lunch with some of my friends when she showed up at my table and said we had to hurry to order lunch on time. I was stunned and looked around to see everyone around me looking at us, wondering how I had managed to achieve the impossible and get a dinner date with the princess. Things moved quickly after that, and a few days later, I was called into the owner's office and told in no uncertain terms what would happen if I hurt his daughter. My job was in jeopardy because she seemed to like me. I studied for 4 long, hard years to get my degree and find a job that I loved and didn't want to lose. It so happened that we worked well and got along great, although I had to do a poor job of supporting her in the way she was used to. It wasn't that I wasn't paid well, it was more about where she wanted to go and how much those places cost. I always remembered that if I made her angry, I would lose my job, so I just put up with all her demands. I should mention that she promised her parents that she would not sleep with men until she got married, and she firmly kept her word. It was frustrating, but it also meant that no one else was getting anything from her. Almost 6 months to the day after we left lunch, she stopped in front of the large window of a stylish jewelry store just to look at the dresses. I had just managed to pay off my credit card and knew I was in trouble. My recent rapid promotion meant that I was finally earning more than she was spending when we went out. Janet made some excuse to go inside just to look, and I stood next to her while she tried on some beautiful jewelry, and then somehow she tried on wedding rings. I soon learned her ring size and the ring she loved. Everything happened very quickly, but I still planned to ask her in a few months. I told her I needed to get back to work, and when she turned around, I motioned for the clerk to hold the ring and I'd be right back. I walked her to her car in the parking lot of our building, and after she left, I walked back and somehow managed to buy the ring that she fell in love with. Returning to work late, I ran into her father, who looked at his watch and then raised his eyebrows at me. It's amazing how you can sometimes get away with it at work when the boss's daughter loves you. It was now or never, and I stopped to talk to him. He was late for something, so when I asked if I could come over that evening to talk to him and his wife, I picked up the ring box. He smiled when he saw it, nodded, and said he would meet me for dinner with his family. I nodded back at him, knowing that dinner was served every night at 8 o'clock sharp. It was Wednesday, so as was usual for them, the whole family was there. Janet won't know I'll be here until she leaves her room to eat. I always enjoyed eating with her family. Her sisters were very funny, and her mother and father liked me, I think. From the very beginning, they of course welcomed me and treated me like the son they never had. My parents died in a car accident several years ago, and it felt good to be loved again. Janet was the eldest of three sisters and by far the most beautiful. Debbie was the next oldest. She was exceptionally intelligent and, although pretty in her own way, looked rather homely when standing next to Janet. She was also a little stockier, with long, mousy brown hair and brown eyes. It didn't take long to realize that she had a strong personality and a loving nature. The youngest was many years younger than them, and most likely this happened by accident. When she gets older, she'll be just as amazing as Janet. However, I really liked Debbie and quickly noticed that she had to work much harder than Janet to be accepted. She studied information technology at university and, unlike Janet, was looking forward to working for her father's company when she graduated. If she had a boyfriend, I would never hear her talk about him or see him. Debbie was always on hand, asking so many questions regarding the concepts she was studying at university, especially when Janet was in no hurry to get downstairs. We got along so well and always had so much fun together, and sometimes I felt like I was more like Debbie. It was too late to change ships in the middle of the ocean. Besides, I loved Janet, although I always let her do her thing and hurt me. Janet was surprised to see me standing at the table waiting for her, and after everyone was seated, their father told everyone that he had invited me. The dinner was good, and the wine was something special, brought from his cellars, and when we had finished eating, I turned to her father. He obviously didn't tell Janet's mother why I was there, and she didn't say anything either, but I could see her squeezing her husband's hand until it turned white. I smiled and then politely asked him if he would allow me to have the pleasure of asking for Janet's hand in marriage. The three girls started squealing, and their mother and father were crying with joy, and then he told me that I had their permission. I turned to Janet, took the box out of my pocket, and opened it, asking if she would marry me. After dinner, the women went into a corner discussing a suitable date and decided to wait 6 months before the wedding. I assumed that they needed enough time to organize everything, and soon I would have another big promotion at work. The wedding went off like a military operation that any general would be proud of. The ceremony was flawless and the reception royal. No expense was spared and the food was excellent. Janet wanted to spend our honeymoon in Hawaii and insisted that we spend our first night as a married couple there, so immediately after cutting the cake and changing our outfits, we were taken by limousine to the airport to catch our flight first class, of course. It cost me a lot of money. As we boarded the plane, I noticed one of the catering workers sitting much further back. He saw us and waved. I answered reluctantly as I didn't like him when I met him earlier and seemed slippery to me. Janet thought he was cute, but I only saw him as a predator. Halfway through the flight, I started to feel unwell, and by the time I landed, I had already used several vomit bags. I had never been airsick before, so I thought I might have caught something or eaten something wrong. There was a serious vomiting virus going around at work before I left, and I figured that must be it. When we checked into the Hilton and got to our honey suite, I knew things were bad. I could see that Janet was upset that I was so sick and that her perfect plans for her wedding night were ruined. The last thing I remember was trying to take a shower to feel better and then waking up in the hospital with Janet sleeping in the chair next to me. She woke up when I started vomiting into the bag, just as the doctor entered the room. He examined me and told me what I already suspected. I had a serious strain of the vomiting virus. Maybe Janet said something about it. I suggested that Janet take a taxi back to the hotel, take a shower, change clothes, and eat, and then come back to me. I saw her tears, and she agreed, saying that she would return in a few hours. The doctor said I should have started to feel better, but this did not happen. The pain in my stomach intensified, and I was vomiting only bile. My abdominal muscles hurt so much that every time I vomited, I felt like I was about to cry from the pain. Before meeting Janet, I already had a similar virus, but it was not as bad as what I was feeling now. I thought it was more like poisoning when I ate spoiled chicken from the local deli and got very sick. I asked the doctor if it could be food poisoning from the chicken I ate at the wedding, but he said Janet had already called her parents and all her friends and no one had food poisoning, so it was unlikely. He then reminded me that he was a doctor and I had better leave my speculations and work on computers. Janet must have talked to him a lot while I was gone. Janet did not return that night. She called after a late dinner, saying she was tired and would see me the next day. I'd like to think I dozed off from time to time, but I was usually woken up by vomiting. I saw that the doctor was concerned and ordered blood tests and studies on what I was vomiting. Around the same time the results came back, I almost convinced him that it could be food poisoning. No matter what medications they gave me, nothing worked, and I could see that the doctor was starting to panic, trying to think of something that could help me. No medications worked. At least he was honest with me when he said that the situation was becoming more dire every day. After lunch, Janet was with me again. She said her body clock was off due to jet lag. I have already seen that although she is worried, she is getting bored. By dinner, she kissed me on the cheek and told me she needed to go back to the hotel for dinner since she had a reservation, and said goodbye before I started vomiting bile again. I barely slept that night as the vomiting became much worse. Finally, I got tired of everything, and the next morning I bribed the nurse to find me some soda. She didn't ask why, but she easily agreed when I gave her $50, saying that she would be back after lunch break. The doctor was even more concerned and said that if I didn't start to get better, my body would start to shut down. I really needed Janet around, but she hasn't been back since last night. Finally, she appeared, but she seemed somehow different. I quickly realized that her thoughts were somewhere far away. She didn't stay long, and I didn't even get a kiss before she left. She said she had dinner planned and would be back late. After dinner, she called again, saying she was tired and would meet me the next day. My bed was next to the window, and I really missed her and wanted to see her when she took a taxi back to the hotel. I learned as far as I could and waited until she appeared on the road to the taxi rank. Then she waved her hand. But something was wrong. She wasn't looking up at me or even in my direction, but at the man standing by the taxi who was waving back at her. My heart was bursting with jealousy, and I recognized him immediately. It was that slimy guy from the catering, a predator. The pain was unbearable when I saw them hug each other before getting into the taxi. The pain I felt then was worse than any physical pain I had experienced before. I must have cried, or at least had tears in my eyes, when the nurse appeared with the baking soda. She just looked at me and said that she walked past them when she came back from the store. Then she said, "She's not worth your suffering. If she cared about you, she'd be here instead of walking with her lover. Find evidence while they both think you're here and they don't suspect a thing." She took a card out of her pocket and handed it to me. "Here's my brother's business card. He's a good private detective, and his office is right across the street. I'll call him now. He's sitting in the office doing nothing. I just talked to him. Let him find out what's really going on, and then you decide what to do. Who knows, maybe they're just long-lost cousins." I couldn't follow her. I could barely move my arms, let alone stand. I knew they weren't cousins, and I simply thanked her, smiling faintly as she used the phone next to my bed to call him. When she hung up, I asked her to get 3 cups of boiling water and a teaspoon, as well as a few extra vomit bags. She looked at me like I was crazy, but still agreed. I dissolved a teaspoon of baking soda in each cup, then waited for them to cool to a manageable temperature. While we waited, I explained that during research I did for a university assignment several years ago, I learned that during World War II, there was a famous Australian doctor who was a prisoner of war at Changi Camp who saved his comrades from death by food poisoning, treating them with soda, and 3 cups with a spoon in each was his cure. It was at least worth a try. It was hard to drink knowing that I would throw up again, but what would happen if I didn't? It would be much worse. I drank the first cup, knowing that as soon as it reached my stomach, it would return immediately, and so it happened, into a finished package. The second cup lingered in my stomach for a moment before it also clattered back into the bag, and I swallowed the third, and the nurse waited for another bout of vomiting, but it did not come. She asked, "What happened to her? Why didn't you throw up?" "No more vomiting, and hopefully I'll be out of here soon. This should work. Nothing else has worked. I saw the look of doubt on her face and added, I don't know how it works, it just works. It helped in the Japanese prisoner of war camp, and I hope it helps now. Your doctor won't be back for 2 days, so let's see how you feel. If your loving wife calls instead of coming, I'll tell her that you're in serious condition and completely bedridden. Maybe guilt will make her come to her senses. I had just finished speaking when the nurse's brother came into my room. I looked at him, he extended his hand, and we shook hands. Janet called saying she was sightseeing and wouldn't come as we had planned. She thought she would be too tired after dinner. As soon as she said that, all I heard was blah 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 as she told me where she was going to go. I explained to the detective that I was afraid of what was going on, and we discussed what could be done to confirm or deny my worst fears, and he smiled when I said that the hotel room was booked in my name. We decided that he should install hidden cameras throughout our room immediately while she was sightseeing during the day and would keep an eye on them for the next few days. Luckily, I still had my room key card in my wallet so he could easily get in while my wife was gone. An hour or so later, he called to say the cameras were installed. He was fast and clearly knew his stuff. Afterwards, he stayed at the hotel and waited for my wife to return, then secretly filmed them from a secluded location. He called again and said that they had gone to separate rooms to change for dinner. I was very worried about Janet being around this slimy guy and tried to call her many times, but she didn't answer. After some time, her phone was turned off. I tried to get out of bed, but I was too weak and fell back. I had to save her. I still felt terrible, but at least I wasn't vomiting anymore. I felt the needle prick my arm, and all thoughts of saving my wife disappeared as I fell into a deep, medicated sleep. I must have slept all night, and when I woke up all I could think about was how I couldn't stop this predator from having sex with my wife. Maybe it would be worth spending the money on someone to make sure he couldn't get close to her. I wanted to get up to try to save what was left of my marriage, but I was tied to the bed. I continued to struggle until the nurses noticed and sedated me. When I woke up again, my kind nurse was on duty, and she freed me from the straps and cleaned me up. I asked if Janet had come to see me, and she checked the visitor log, but couldn't find her name since I saw her get into a taxi with this guy, but said Janet had called the last 2 days around lunchtime. The doctor finally showed up and was surprised that I wasn't vomiting anymore, and the nurse told him that I had taken the soda. He had never heard of it being used before and asked many questions that I could not answer except the most important ones. I didn't vomit anymore. He said I needed to stay a few more days to gain strength and warned me that if I tried to leave I would be tied up again as I was still too weak to walk. I told the nurse that I still had to save my wife, but I could see the pain in her eyes. I didn't want her to talk, but I knew I heard. Her brother had found evidence of her infidelity. Her lover even moved into our room, and the sex was almost continuous. It was too late, and she held me while I cried on her shoulder. My marriage was over before it began. She left a note in my file at the front desk that my condition had not changed and I was under sedatives. My strength returned little by little as I started eating limited amounts of steamed rice and dry toast. Final laboratory tests confirmed that the chicken I ate was poisoned by a rare strain of botulism. It was created in a laboratory in my home state and designed for germ warfare. My doctor said that the police and other concerned agencies in my state have received the full report and are awaiting my return. Gaining strength, I began to put my life in order. Janet stopped visiting completely and never called again after being told I would be discharged in time for our return flight. I still couldn't reach her on the phone and left messages at the hotel desk. I really missed her, and now all the nurses knew what happened and were taking care of me. One of my new friend's close friends, another nurse, came over one day and said her father was a divorce lawyer in my hometown and called him in front of me. She told him that I was her good friend and I was poisoned at the wedding, and the culprit took my wife away. It seemed like my wife didn't care about me anymore, and I wanted a divorce. I interrupted her and told her that we had a prenuptial agreement that if cheating was proven, The unfaithful partner would walk away with little more than his clothes. It was a hard bargain. Her father insisted on signing to protect their family's interests, but Janet insisted on him signing too. I didn't have a copy with me, but I could send it to him as soon as I got home. I could almost hear him smile. My private detective came to give me his regular report and message. Please note that I sent copies of the recordings to my lawyer. I saw that he was upset and asked what the problem was. His answer got me thinking. Since you're still here, I sent copies of everything to the lawyer, and then I called him and told him that he should pay special attention to some of them. When I said that I was going to see you, he asked me to tell him that he was ready and waiting. I looked at the tapes before I sent them in. I hate doing it because I know what it means for most marriages. Look, I regret not paying more attention that first night. He drugged her, you know. I don't understand how I missed it then. If I had seen him do this, I would have saved her. Based on her flirting with him, I honestly thought they had already slept together. I confirmed all this when I watched the recording where he calls his brother and tells how everything went well. On the tape, he's bragging that what they put in your chicken worked great and that they'll have to get some more from their cousin while he's still working in the lab. He thinks the doctors haven't gotten it right, so they are going to use it again on another couple, only this time it will be his brother's turn to get married. Anyway, it left Janet vulnerable, and then he drugged her into having dinner with him. Hell, the bastard even bragged that he was her first. I'm so sorry. I really am. The thing is, he only used it on her once. Since then, she's become insatiable and can't get enough of sex with him. I have a separate DVD here of his confession about your poisoning to give to the police. I can send it to them if you want. My sister said that the police have already received the medical and laboratory results and are waiting for you to return to testify and, of course, record the confession, after which they will arrest and charge him and his brother. When they find their cousin he is talking about, he will also be arrested if he is not caught before the FBI. When I told your lawyer about the poisoning, he said he would start preparing paperwork to sue the catering company for contaminating your food, even though it wouldn't save your marriage. He also has paperwork ready for you to sign when you get home to begin the divorce process. If you are thinking about forgiving her, know that they plan to continue dating and continue their relationship. She told him that she would not leave you for him because she still loves you. Anyway, he is married and his wife owns a catering business company, so I'm sure he would have left Janet when he got bored with her. You know that your wife was planning to get pregnant during your honeymoon. This is due to the fortune that her grandmother left her as an inheritance with certain conditions. It gets even worse when you hear them talking about how she might already be pregnant and you will raise his child. I knew he was trying to help me, but every word he said only made my condition worse. I had no reason to doubt his words, and this only made me more upset. He then added, "The bastard is even wearing your clothes now. Your wife told him it would improve his image." All I could do was shake my head, knowing I would never wear those clothes again, just like I knew I would never touch Janet again. Some strength returned much faster than expected, and I thanked everyone for their support and help and then checked out. I booked the first available flight home and took a taxi to the airport. No one greeted me when I arrived. No one expected me, and certainly not without my beautiful wife. Without Janet and her family, I was alone in the world again. I had already moved all my clothes to the mansion that Janet's parents gave us as a wedding gift, so I went there. On the way home, what a joke it was what a house I called my lawyer, asking him to come to me in the morning so that I could sign all the necessary documents. The day was long and difficult, and although I didn't think I'd be able to sleep, I soon dozed off watching TV. The next thing I remember was screaming and being roughly thrown to the floor. I was handcuffed, then read my rights and presented with a variety of charges. I couldn't believe it. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just sleeping at home. I was charged with trespassing, and when they found that I stole, they added theft. I couldn't see her, but I immediately recognized her voice when she demanded that I be severely punished for what I had done. At the same time, I heard another familiar voice at the door asking me to enter. I heard Debbie gasp, and then my lawyer exploded as he began cursing at all the police officers present. "He's the owner, you fucking idiots," he shouted. "I'll take your badge numbers. You're all screwed. Why did you handcuff him and beat him up?" Debbie cried and ran to me. The police let me go, and I fell back to the floor, still feeling the pain from the many heavy blows. There was deathly silence as I heard my lawyer apparently calling the police chief, demanding to speak to the commissioner. I heard mutterings around me and quiet curses under my breath as my handcuffs were removed much more gently than they had been put on. They tried to lift me up again, but I screamed in pain, apparently having severely injured my ribs. Debbie screamed hysterically not to touch me, and I begged not to be touched. She leaned over me, crying and saying that Janet was desperately looking for me in Hawaii, and she would call her to tell her that she had found me. I felt quite weak, probably due to the blow to the head, but I managed to reach Debbie's hand and beg her not to tell anyone that I was back, and if she wanted to know the reason, let her watch the DVD in front of the TV and talk to my lawyer. I couldn't finish what I wanted to say because everything around me was plunged into darkness again. In a semi-conscious state, I heard beeping noises around me and prayed that it was a bad dream and I was still on my honeymoon. Was it Janet who held my hand so tenderly, and was it her tears that I felt on my hand, which she pressed to her cheek? Slowly, I opened my eyes and had a hard time adjusting to the bright light of the fluorescent lamps overhead. I already felt that my chest was bandaged from the blows. As my senses began to return, I heard whispers over and over. "I'm so sorry, James. Please forgive me for what I did. This shouldn't have happened. James, my God, what have I done?" I began to remember the worst 2 weeks of my life and wondered if it was my loving wife who had found me and asked for forgiveness. Wait, the aroma was wrong and her voice was much softer. It wasn't Janet. My eyes finally opened, and before I could focus, she jumped up and started screaming, "He's awake! He's awake!" I saw that it was Debbie sitting next to me, still holding my wet hand, and her cheek was red from pressing it to my hand. I looked around and saw my lawyer. I remembered his face from the photographs his daughter showed him in the hospital and from seeing him at home. Then I closed my eyes and sighed, remembering the pain I woke up with, God knows how long ago. I heard a commotion begin and felt someone touching me, then a cold stethoscope. Someone lifted my eyelids and shone a bright light on my eyes. I could hear the heart rate monitor next to me beeping monotonously, so I knew I was alive. Why don't they leave me alone? I'll have to remember not to sign anymore if it leads to this result. Slowly, they retreated from me. When I opened my eyes again and looked around, the room seemed almost full, but I only recognized 2 people. Debbie was still crying as she introduced me to the lawyer. Then he took the floor and proceeded to introduce me to the others. First was my doctor, then the nurse who will be with me all the time until I recover. The government paid the bills. Then the police commissioner and the district attorney came up. Since my lawyer suggested that I feared for my life after a recent poisoning attempt, they even introduced 2 police officers who would stand at the door until I recovered. In general, everything was quite chaotic. Then there was silence for a few minutes, and the only sound was Debbie's sobs and the beeping of the heart monitor. Thank God, it was comforting. The police commissioner broke the silence and approached me, apologizing on behalf of the police department for the actions of several overzealous officers. He then mentioned that he was having a hard time coping with the knowledge of what his son had done. I was sure he didn't want me to indict his people. I didn't understand why the DA was here until he said they wanted to get the 2 brothers and their cousin arrested as quickly as possible, but they still needed my written statement. My attorney intervened and read me a prepared statement that we had discussed while I was still in Hawaii, and I quickly signed it, and then the attorney left. The doctor was called and 2 policemen followed him, but then stood on either side of the door. When everything calmed down, I finished signing all the necessary documents for my lawyer. He found a copy of our prenuptial agreement on the floor, next to where I fell asleep last night. I read it. I whispered a few sentences to my lawyer, and as he listened to them, he just kept nodding with a stupid smile on his face. The police commissioner made a small mistake in apologizing for his son, who was one of the police officers who attacked me, and was now clearly worried about both of their careers if I went public with the fact that the police attacked me in my own home for no reason. We closed the door for privacy and offered some suggestions to the concerned father. Nothing out of the ordinary, but nevertheless he agreed to try to make this possible with the help of his political and legal connections. I didn't want much, and I wasn't going to take them to court if I could get a quick divorce and cause maximum harm and jail time to the two brothers. If that didn't work out, my private investigator in Hawaii offered to help because he still felt responsible. Debbie stayed with me the entire first day and night, hardly leaving my bed. She refused even when I suggested that she go home and change clothes. Janet called her several times in tears, saying she still hadn't found me. She even mentioned that my luggage was still in our room. While she was crying, Debbie admitted to me that she was the one who called the police. She came into the house, as she did every morning, to make sure everything was okay. When she came in, she saw the mess I left in the kitchen and several beer bottles on the floor. My arm was hanging over the edge of the sofa, and not seeing who I was, she called the police, who were overzealous. Of course, I forgave her, and she again pressed my hand to her cheek. One time, when Debbie had her phone on speaker and Janet was talking to her, I heard the guy mutter something in the background. I turned off the phone, then asked Debbie to ask Janet who the man was in her room talking in the background. Janet's phone quickly went offline, but she called back a few minutes later, saying the signal must have been lost. This time, there was no noise in the background. The next morning, my lawyer returned. It seemed to me that he was enjoying a job that had so much variety. He confirmed that government officials had agreed in principle to grant the divorce at the first hearing that day, based on the evidence presented, the prenuptial agreement, and the attempted murder of me. Maybe the attempted murder was exaggerated, but that was the charge we wanted to bring against the brothers. Although this had no legal significance, the fact that our marriage was not consummated, and she continued to cheat on me while I lay on death's door in the hospital was taken into account. In addition, she stated her intention to continue to cheat and have children with her lover. Against the backdrop of all this, the court granted me a quick divorce. He returned before lunch with my final decree of divorce and invited Debbie to bring her father, not telling him the reason or direction until he arrived so the situation could be explained to him. His reputation for explosive reactions to certain situations has been well documented. Debbie agreed and went to get her father, knowing it would be very difficult to get him to come to our hospital room. She texted me as she left his office with him in hot pursuit, and when they arrived, our room was darkened with the curtains closed. We could see he wasn't very happy and didn't know what exactly Debbie told him to get him to follow her. The police at the door alerted him. The police were instructed to let them in without stopping, and as their eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw surprise on his face. It was clear that he was ready to explode, so my lawyer quickly intervened and asked him to sit and listen, and then ask questions. My lawyer was good, and I wondered how much I would end up paying him. I never asked, and he never said anything. I was surprised when Debbie sat next to me on the bed and took my hand, and her father gave us both a dirty look. Then my lawyer started to twist the truth a little, but it was kind of factual. My father-in-law, now former father-in-law, quickly learned that I was under police protection because the authorities feared for my life after I was deliberately poisoned at a wedding. I saw the horror on his face. He continued and told him that while I lay almost dying in a hospital bed, my loving wife stopped visiting me and I couldn't even reach her on the phone while she continued to cheat with the man who poisoned me. Our marriage was not consummated, and now she may say that she is pregnant in order to receive a huge inheritance from her grandmother. Debbie's father just sat there shaking his head in disbelief. Then Debbie told him that she had seen video evidence of her betrayal and listened to their plans for the future. He sounded defeated when he finally said, "But Janet called every night saying how worried she was about you and how you'd been very sick all this time because of the virus. She said she stayed with you the whole time. And then the other day called in a panic, saying that you had disappeared from the hospital while she was away and no one could find you. We were going to fly there to help her, but she insisted that we need to meet her here because she has a friend who will help her there. She was sure that you would show up before departure time. She even suggested that you might have been a little delusional. She's flying home tomorrow on a return ticket, hoping you'll be with her. My lawyer continued, "You need to understand that Janet was not part of the plot to poison James and is a fellow victim, but unfortunately she committed adultery and continued her infidelity on a daily basis, completely ignoring James when he was in critical condition. Both James and the hospital tried to contact Janet in the final days before he was discharged, but she didn't answer their calls, so he flew home without knowing where she was. So the state made an exception and allowed the divorce to be finalized based on their prenuptial agreement. They are no longer married. Here is some of the photographic evidence taken, and you can see that it has a date and time to show that her behavior was not disposable or casual. I suggest you don't watch them." My ex-father-in-law looked at me with a sadness I'll never forget, then tilted his head the same way Janet did the first time and looked at Debbie, who was holding my hand. "You too?" "No," we answered at the same time. Debbie found me at home when I returned from Hawaii, and she stayed with me, helping me through painful situations over the last few days while I was hospitalized. Without her, God knows what would have happened to me. She was like my angel, the guardian that Janet was supposed to be. "Debbie, I have a huge favor to ask of you, honey. Can you stay close to James and take care of him for us? Our family owes him so much for what your sister did. I'm not sure we can ever overcome her complete disrespect and lies to all of us. I need to talk to your mother and warn her so that she doesn't faint when she finds out what happened and what Janet will find when she gets home." I spoke again. "Please allow Janet to stay with you in your home. There is a restraining order preventing her from coming near me because of her affair with the caterer while I was sick. Remember, she was drugged in the beginning and then taken advantage of. I'm sorry, but because of her actions and obvious infidelity, I will never be able to stay married to her. If it had only been this one time with that bastard when he drugged her, it would have been different, and I would have forgiven her. But in the last couple of weeks, she has completely destroyed my trust in her. I will never forget how much I loved her." While they were discussing what had happened, the nurse came in and injected something into my Roman 4. Then I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, it was morning, and the others were gone, of course, but Debbie was still sitting next to me, sleeping peacefully in the big old chair that someone had found for her. We still had plenty of time before Janet's plane arrived, so I let Debbie sleep. I somehow knew that she stayed up late, just sitting and watching me every time I moved or twitched. The police commissioner had arranged for us to be there when the scoundrel was arrested, and of course that meant we'd be there when Janet was served with her divorce papers. The police commissioner's driver and his car picked us up and brought us to the main entrance, where we were met by the head of airport security, his cousin. As we entered with Debbie holding me up, we were escorted to the mezzanine to wait for the show to begin. It's strange, after all the times I've been here over the years, I've never noticed the mezzanine before. It blended in with the design of the building and was part of the post-9/11 security system. Although all the windows were mirrored, when viewed from the public below, they were essentially one-way mirrors on sliding windows. The concept was to provide additional security by preventing the public from realizing that they were being watched and monitored the entire time they were in the terminal. We were given a short tour while we waited, but by the end I could barely take another step and was put into a wheelchair afterwards. I wasn't as restored as I thought I was, and I was sure the beatings from the police didn't help. We watched as their parents entered the terminal and waited quietly in the arrivals area. Debbie came down to meet them and talk for a few minutes to let them know that Janet would receive her divorce papers as soon as she entered the arrivals hall. Debbie also informed them that I was watching from a wheelchair above. As I watched, her mother raised her hand to her mouth, and I wasn't sure which part of the conversation she was reacting to. I had a feeling it was because I was in a wheelchair because she already knew about the documents. The show soon started and Debbie joined me again as we watched the two lovers step off the plane together. Before they appeared in public, they hugged and kissed, apparently saying goodbye. When they separated, the police attacked him, and he foolishly tried to resist. He was handcuffed and dragged away, screaming and protesting that he had done nothing. Less confident, Janet went to the arrivals hall to collect her luggage. I already knew from my private investigator in Hawaii that my luggage was left at the hotel reception. Like a loving wife, but by this point I no longer expected anything else from her after 2 weeks of her relationship with her lover. She even let him take the clothes he wanted to keep. The bastard even wore my favorite shirt home. As she entered the arrival hall, she saw her mother waving and headed towards them. Before she approached them, a well-dressed woman stopped her, and I turned on my little radio to listen. We heard a woman ask her if she was Janet and heard Janet answer yes. It was obvious from the tone of her voice that she had no idea what was about to happen. Her mother and father knew what was going on and supported each other. It was terrible for the family, even in our time. The representative continued, "Janet Thomas, you are being served with a final decree of divorce confirming the dissolution of your marriage on the grounds of infidelity. The state has granted James Thomas petition for divorce and, based on your signed prenuptial agreement, has awarded him all but $10,000 of your marital property and bank accounts. Dollars, your clothes and car. The court's decision is final and cannot be appealed." It was the final moment in my marriage, and even after what she had done to me, I found myself with tears in my eyes as Janet opened the envelope, apparently not understanding what she had just been told. I bit my lip as we watched her read the cover letter from the court. Debbie squeezed my hand as I stood up, and we opened the window in front of us. The movement of the window caught her father's attention, then her parents looked at us, and I wiped away my tears. I heard Janet cry out in despair when she realized what had happened and looked to her parents for support. Realizing that they weren't looking at her, she followed their gaze and saw Debbie and I standing together, looking at her. Then she fainted. Terminal staff quickly ran to Janet and carried her on a stretcher to a nearby medical room so she could recover. Debbie still loved her sister and wanted to make sure she was okay before we went back to the hospital, so she took me to where Janet was resting. Their parents were with her as she cried, pleading with them that she didn't deserve what I did to her. Debbie walked in and joined them, greeting her sister coldly and telling her that she would see her later. Before leaving, she turned to Janet and said, "Your lover was the one who poisoned James. He almost died while you cheated on him every day." She then turned to the door and kissed them both on the cheeks as she passed her parents. As Debbie wheeled my wheelchair past the door, I saw Janet looking at us and heard her scream, "James, please come back. I didn't know. Please, I still love you. James, please." Her father held her back so she wouldn't run after us. Debbie didn't leave my bed for more than a few minutes at a time after that. I spent another week in the hospital before being discharged, and before I was discharged, I learned that the brothers and their cousin were not given bail at the hearing. It seemed like the creep who slept with Janet got his divorce papers while he was awaiting trial. My lawyer met with his wife and gave her enough evidence to get rid of him. Even their insurance company quickly settled the case to avoid larger court-ordered payouts. Back home, Debbie looked after me, and over the next months, as I gradually gained weight and strength, I realized that I had been right before the wedding when I thought Debbie and I were more compatible. Unlike her sister, she made no demands and was happy to just sit with me and watch movies or stargaze. Janet always wanted to be in some fancy restaurant or nightclub. While she was still caring for me, Debbie had to go back to university, but she still stayed with me every night. She didn't need to go home every time to get clothes, since everything was in my guest room by that time. She still attended the obligatory Wednesday family dinners. Although I was told that I could take as many sick days as I needed, as soon as I received the doctor's clearance, I returned to work. When I entered the office, you could hear a needle drop, but everything quickly died down, although no one knew what to say to me. Everyone heard rumors about what happened, and my short marriage was not a topic of conversation. I think more for fear of losing my job. Before lunch, I received a call and was directed to meet with my ex-father-in-law. Although I was still accepted as part of the family, I didn't expect to be invited back to their home with Janet living there. I half expected to be fired and told I was no longer needed. Instead of the expected dismissal, I was invited to dinner after all. It was Wednesday. I reminded him that Janet was still under a restraining order, so he said that she had finally been admitted to a private clinic for treatment of depression caused by her actions and the catastrophic consequences on her life. She even lost her child. Dinner was a little tense at the beginning when Debbie sat next to me instead of Janet. Janet's name was not mentioned at all, but I caught her mother's glances several times. Finally, she spoke. "James, what are your plans for the future? We know that you are not dating anyone and that you only see Debbie on Wednesdays. You two seem really close since. Well, you know when, and we just want to say that we're so sorry for everything that happened, and we loved having you as part of our family. Although we may be ahead of the curve, we would really like for you to remain part of our family someday." I could see she was embarrassed and confused. Then she continued, "I was dreaming of having grandchildren soon, and we thought that maybe you and Debbie were interested in each other." Then she blushed. I turned to Debbie, took her hand, and said, "I think your mother wants me to make you a baby. Do you want to start practicing tonight?" By the smile on my face, everyone knew that I was joking, I hoped. Debbie replied, "James, you know I promised my parents that I wouldn't be with a man until we got married, so if you want to have a baby, we'll have to get married." I expected a light, playful reaction from Debbie, but not this one. The table became quiet, as if everyone was waiting for my answer. My mind was racing. My proposal to Janet was carefully considered, but Debbie and I became best friends while she took care of me. We spent long hours telling each other about our dreams, likes, and dislikes. We came close to intimacy several times, but always stopped ourselves. It was so nice to be with her. I loved just lying next to her and listening to her breathing. And then it dawned on me. We were more than best friends and so compatible. At that moment, I realized how much I loved her. Perhaps it was a reaction to the breakup with Janet, but I doubted it. It seemed that I loved her even more than her sister. It seemed like everyone had been waiting an hour for my answer, but only about a minute passed a very long, fateful 60 seconds. I turned to her parents, licked my dry lips, and maybe even trembled a little, then finally said, "Well, I guess if you both want me to stay in the family and want grandchildren, then you'll be happy if I ask. Debbie will marry me." Her mother burst into tears and replied, "Please, we'd like that." I didn't have a ring to give her at that moment, but I turned to Debbie and without any hesitation asked her to be my wife, of course. We kissed as soon as she agreed. Then her mother added, "The same rules as for your sister apply to the inheritance. Let's discuss the date." And the three women left. Her father knew I was puzzled and was about to leave the table to avoid my next question, which he knew would come. I stood up and followed him to the veranda. I heard about this inheritance and wondered if it was one of the reasons why Janet betrayed me so easily. I knew that she wanted to get pregnant on her honeymoon, and we often joked about it. Sometimes I thought that she chose me as her husband just for this. Is there any truth in this? He didn't answer, so I continued, "I know she said she loved me and all, but in the end I have to wonder if I was just a fertility trick on our honeymoon because she liked me when we met. You know, it's recorded that she said she hoped to be pregnant by her lover while I was unavailable at the hospital. I hope Debbie is not affected in the same way by the inheritance that looms before her." Silence followed. Finally, he replied, "My mother was incredibly rich in her own right, and when she died, she left her fortune to 3 girls on the condition that they fulfill several conditions. The first is that they must be innocent at the time of the wedding, and they must be tested on the wedding day. Second, that they would have a child within 9 months of the honeymoon, and third, that they would name the child after my mother or father. If they don't meet all or any of these 3 conditions, the inheritance is reduced from $10 million to $1 million. So when we saw Janet's behavior, we wondered, like you. Janet will be left with nothing, by the way. She will be given $1 million after fulfilling the third condition, but you can't help but wonder if she went all out for 10 million and just took advantage of a bad situation. We're really sorry about that. We didn't see it when you got married and thought Janet really loved you. Debbie is different from her sister, but I'm sure you realized that already. It seems like there's already a strong connection between you two, ready for formalization in marriage. We've seen Debbie when she's with you. You know, she never stops looking at you. Her eyes are always on you. There's more in my mother's will, but you'll find out later. I'm not at liberty to discuss more. Of course, you will need to sign the marriage contract again, you understand. What he told me potentially answered some questions, but it also raised many more. I was about to ask more questions, but his phone rang, and he whispered that he had to answer. At that moment, the women appeared, seeming full of energy, or maybe it was just the champagne they were drinking too much of. Debbie came up to me and hugged me, then we sealed the kiss for a few minutes. Her mother jokingly said, "Oh my God, you two take the number." I had an idea and whispered to Debbie, "You heard your mother. I think she wants us to start making grandchildren right now. Let's go to your room for the night and get started." I started to lead her away. Deep down, I needed to test Debbie to see if she wanted me or a chance at a big inheritance. Almost like playing chicken with two cars racing towards each other. I needed to know if she was willing to give up everything for me. Debbie did not object, but replied, "You already know that I promised my parents to wait until our wedding. I think Dad has already told you about the inheritance and its conditions, but you know that more than anything in the world, I want to spend my whole life with you. We're losing a lot, but if this is what you want, I want it too." She turned to her parents and bid them good night. We entered the house, and her mother's eyes became round as saucers, and her mouth opened, but there was no sound. I stopped and turned to Debbie as we walked through the door, then said quietly, "Debbie, you made a promise to your parents, and it's obviously important to them. Besides, you were willing to give up your inheritance for me, but that's not fair to you, so we'll wait until our wedding. Just don't take too long, please. You're so desirable, but I'll wait." Then we sealed the kiss again, and I hugged her tightly. 3 months later, we got married. Debbie also signed our prenuptial agreement, reaffirming her faith in our future, which only made me wonder even more about Janet's feelings for me. Janet attended the wedding of the new man in her life and wished us happiness. Her psychologist was excellent, and she benefited from therapy. They suit each other well and are planning a wedding for next year. We were able to wait until our wedding night, and almost 9 months later, Elaine Marjorie Thomas was born a week or two early. We had just returned Elaine home when her grandmother visited us to help, of course, and started asking what our plans were for the next grandchild. My parents would have adored Elaine, and my only regret was that my mother couldn't hold my little girl and spoil her as she grew older. I just knew they would be so close. Sometimes when I looked at Elaine, I saw my mother's smile and knew that my mother was sharing precious moments with her granddaughter. At the first Wednesday family dinner we took Elaine to, we were surprised by the family lawyer who was invited as a guest, and after dinner he gave Debbie the details of a $10 million account. Just when we thought it was all over, I was stunned to receive 10% of the family company and an appointment as vice president as part of the inheritance. Every day I realized that I was now definitely married to the right sister. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.